Got your attention, eh? This is part of the drama. The Christ candle is lit. A simple but powerful symbol of presence, of seeing things in a different light. And being on a path that needs that light for us to follow. And as we walk the path of faith daily on land that is sacred, a place of gathering and source of food and shelter and spiritual connection for many indigenous peoples of Turtle Island over many thousands of years, we're learning to respect the long history of stewardship and of relationship with the land and its creatures that is shared among the Huron-Wendat, the Petun, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We have a long way to go, but we are working to learn how to live in right relations with them and with this glorious land.
The important question that we need to ask of any story, that is, who is telling the story, is one that Jesus, the master storyteller, comes up against suddenly and unexpectedly. It happens at a point where he is himself trying to get time away from the arbiters of God's story, the Pharisees and others. It's ironic and reveals the same kinds of blind spots that continue today. Jesus can see how the religious leaders are seeking to silence him, but not how he seeks to silence an unnamed, desperate woman. Everything seems to be working against this woman: gender, race, religion, class, and nationality, to help her find help for her daughter. Her vulnerability is heartbreaking. When she's turned away by this spiritual leader, it would have felt like being turned away by God, which is why it's so hard when people are hurt or worse, traumatized in church. We expect to experience God's welcome and embrace here. If we are dismissed, it cuts deeply to the core. That is what disturbs us in this story. How could Jesus compare this woman to a dog? Who is telling the story that says she doesn't belong, that she doesn't deserve bread, or that others are more important? When Jesus takes back the story to tell it for himself, the story and the moment is transformed. From Mark chapter 7, verses 24 to 37. From there, Jesus set out for the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house where he didn't think he would be found, but he couldn't escape notice. He was barely inside when a woman who had a disturbed daughter heard where he was. She came and knelt at his feet, begging for help. The woman was Greek, Syro-Phoenician by birth. She asked him to cure her daughter. He said, "Stand in line and take your turn. The children get fed first. If there's any left over, the dogs get it." She said, "Of course, Master, but don't dogs under the table get scraps dropped off by the children?" Jesus was impressed. "You're right. On your way, your daughter is no longer disturbed. The demonic affliction is gone." She went home and found her daughter relaxed on the bed, the torment gone for good. Jesus gave the people strict orders not to tell anyone, but the more he tried to silence them, the more eagerly they shared the news. And our second reading, we can miss the importance of Jesus' impact on people as storyteller by giving his stories a special name, parables. It elevates them outside the reality and impact of Jesus' use of story to profoundly recast God's relationship with humanity and with creation. His stories essentially reintroduce us to God and invite us to see ourselves anew in the light of God's love and close attention to the world. Matthew sketches out a typical day for Jesus in simple, effective words. Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 to 35. Another story. God's kingdom is like an acorn that a farmer plants. It is quite small as seeds go, but in the course of years it grows into a huge oak tree, and eagles build nests in it. Another story. God's kingdom is like yeast that a woman works into the dough for dozens of loaves of barley bread and waits while the dough rises. All Jesus did that day was tell stories. A long storytelling afternoon. His storytelling fulfilled the prophecy. I will open my mouth and tell stories. I will bring out into the open things hidden since the world's first day. In these readings, we hear God's voice. God is still speaking. Thanks be to God.
The word story, meaning a connected account or narration, oral or written, came to English from Anglo-French around the year 1200. It referred to a tale as well as to a chronicle or history of events. Story was not differentiated from history. Happenings that are true to life, and sometimes truer than true. So it matters that we pay attention to, that we ask about who is telling the story. What shapes their telling of a story as opposed to someone else who brings a different life experience or perspective. As we know, the victors write history. The rich write economics, and the men write about power. It's about control of the narrative, the shaping of public memory and perception. It comes down to privilege. Stories start with language, and there's a recent, quite fascinating book, The Language Puzzle, by the archaeologist Stephen Mithen, that traces the evolution of language from the earliest homonyms to modern humans' loud and determined consumption of words. Language is for many people the thing that makes us human, that sets us apart from other life. Can the vocal tracts of apes make the same sounds as ours? Is language encoded in our genetics? Did the acquisition of increasingly sophisticated language alter how our ancestors perceived the world? Stephen Mithen's book works this puzzle through many disciplines, but I suspect, and this is my unproven theory, that language emerged because sitting around the fire at night, our ancestors were dying to tell stories. When we tell stories, we create connection. MRI tests done on storytellers and listeners indicate that the same brain lobes are activated. It's neural coupling. It's mirroring of experience. Storytelling creates trust. Storytelling makes us human. Before writing, there was language and there were stories. The story of Jesus and an unnamed woman in the Gospels is memorable not only because of that woman's persistence, which is remarkable, but it's also remarkable for her critical listening. Who says that the story that Jesus came first for the Jewish people and then after that for the rest is true, she asks. Why is it assumed to be a given? She questions the story. She protests, and that brings about a new paradigm, a new version of humanity's story and relationship with God and God's Spirit. People in churches often experience this story of Jesus as unsettling, similar to being unsettled by uncovering the wounds of residential schools in relation to the church's complicity. It makes us uncomfortable. I think that the directness of the dialogue between Jesus and this woman prompts us, perhaps, hopefully, to listen closely to stories that seem self-evident to us, to name diversities, to call us all to account in order to be delivered from the broken and wounding storylines that hold our society hostage. Some of the spirit and grit that we see and hear in the Syrophoenician woman is also expressed in a poem written by the U.S. poet Kaylin Hott. She grew up on an Oklahoma prairie. Her father was a preacher and an oil field roustabout. Her mother, a homemaker, factory worker, and Sunday school teacher. Kaylin Hott died in 2018, and I shared her poem, God Says Yes to Me, previously, but it's worth repeating. I asked God if it was okay to be melodramatic, and she said yes. I asked her if it was okay to be short, and she said, sure it is. I asked her if I could wear nail polish or not wear nail polish, and she said, honey, she calls me that sometimes, she said, you can do just exactly what you want to. Thanks, God, I said. And is it okay even if I don't paragraph my letters? Sweet cakes, God said. Who knows where she picked that up? What I'm telling you is yes, yes, yes. The Syrophoenician woman tells Jesus, guess what? God said yes to me. God said yes to me when God tore open the heavens. God said yes to me when God decided to show up in the wilderness rather than in the temple. God said yes to me when you came here instead of spending all of your time in Jerusalem. It's okay to be me, so get over yourself, Jesus. Like the Syrophoenician woman who gets Jesus to see God for what and who God truly is, Kaylin Hott's honey, or sweet cakes, tells the truth. Another woman who does this comes to us in the recent best-selling novel, Cutting for Stone, written by Abraham Verghese, just before his even more successful novel, The Covenant of Water. The story in Cutting for Stone is centered on a mission hospital, known locally as Missing Hospital, in Addis Ababa, beginning in the 1950s. One day in the mid-1960s, a white man representing a Baptist church in Texas that donates regularly to the hospital arrives from Houston to check up on how those donations are performing. He's named Elihu Harris. The hospital had just lost its primary surgeon and head nurse through a series of events, and things are desperate when the matron, an English nun from an order that she no longer has any contact with, meets with Elihu Harris. And Harris at one point speaks of his committee's sincere commitment to the hospital as a way to bring knowledge of the Redeemer to those who do not have it. Matron lets out an exasperated laugh. Did you think they were all fire worshipers, tree worshipers? Mr. Harris, they are Christians. They are no more in need of redemption than you are in need of hair straightening cream. Harris responds, but I feel it's not true Christianity. It's a pagan sort of pagan, Mr. Harris, Matron fires back. When our pagan ancestors back in Yorkshire and Saxony were using their enemies' skulls as plates to serve food, these Christians here were singing the Psalms. They believe they have the Ark of the Covenant locked up in a church in Axum. Not a saint's finger or a pope's toe, but the Ark. Ethiopian believers put on the shirts of men who had just died in the plague. They saw in the plague a sure means of winning eternal life, of finding salvation. That, she said, tapping the table, is how much they thirsted for the next life. Tell me, in Dallas, do your parishioners hunger like that for salvation? Harris had turned red. He looked around as if for a place to hide, but he wasn't completely done. Men like him become stubborn with opposition because their convictions were all they had. It's actually Houston, not Dallas, he said. But matron, the priests here are almost illiterate. They don't understand the litany that they recite because it's in Ge'ez. Ge'ez, Church Amharic, which is an ancient form of the language used in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church worship. They only speak because it is in Ge'ez, which no one speaks. If the priest holds to the Monophysite doctrine that Christ had only one nature, divine and not a human one, then stop, Mr. Harris. Do stop, matron said, covering her ears. Oh, how you vex me. She came around the table and Harris drew back as if he worried she might box his ears. Matron walked to the window. When you look around Addis and see children barefoot and shivering in the rain, when you see the lepers begging for their next morsel, does any of that monophysitic nonsense matter the least bit? Matron leaned her head on the window pane. God will judge us, Mr. Harris, by... Her voice broke as she thought of Sister Mary Joseph Praise, the head nurse who had just died. God will judge us by what we did to relieve the suffering of our fellow human beings. I don't think God cares what doctrine we embrace. The sight of that plain, weathered face pressed against the glass, the wet cheeks, the interlocking fingers, was for Harris more powerful than anything she had said. Here was a woman who could give up the restrictions of her order when it stood in the way. From her lips had come the kind of fundamental truth, which because of its simplicity was unspoken in a church like Harris's, where internecine squabbling seemed to be the purpose for the committee's existence. It was a small blessing that an ocean separated the doers like matron from their patrons, because if they rubbed shoulders, they'd make each other very uncomfortable. Harris stared at a stack of Bibles by the wall. We have more English Bibles than there are English-speaking people in the entire country, matron said. Polish Bibles, French Bibles, Italian Bibles. I think some are from your Sunday school children. We need medicine and food, but we get Bibles, matron smiled. I always wondered if the good people who send us Bibles really think that hookworm and hunger are healed by Scripture. Our patients are illiterate. I'm embarrassed, Harris said. No, please. People here love these Bibles. They're the most valuable thing a family can possess, matron said. Do you know what the Emperor Menelik, who ruled before Haile Selassie, did when he fell ill? He ate pages of the Bible. I don't think it helped. This is a land where paper, where ketu, is much valued. Priests will give out pieces of paper with verses on them, and the paper is folded over and over again and again until it's a tiny square, and then these are wrapped in leather and worn around the neck. I was happy to give away Bibles, but the interior minister saw it as proselytizing. How can it be proselytizing when no one can read? So the Bibles pile up, Mr. Harris. They breed in the tool shed like rabbits. They spill over into our storerooms. We use them to support bookshelves or to paper the walls of the huts. Let's take a walk, matron said. Look, she said when they were in the hallway, pointing to a sign above a door, Operating Theater 1. The room was a closet, jammed full of Bibles. Wordlessly, she pointed to another room across the way, which Harris could see was a storeroom for mops and buckets. Above it, the sign read, Operating Room 2. operating theater too. We only have one theater, matron said. We call it operating theater 3. Judge me harshly if you will, Mr. Harris, but I take what I'm given in God's name to serve these people, and if the doctors insist on giving me another operating theater for the famous Thomas Stone, the departed surgeon, when what I need are catheters, syringes, penicillin, and money for oxygen tanks so I can keep the one single theater going, then I will give them their operating theater in name. They go into the children's ward and see a little boy dying of meningitis, his mother seated with him, and Harris wonders why. If the boy is dying and there are many children at home, the mother is here, far from their village. Look at how anemic she is, matron responded. We are feeding her. We give her the child's portions, which the child can't eat, as well as her portion, and I've asked them to give her an egg every day, and she's getting an iron injection and medicine for hookworm. In a few days, we'll find her bus fare and then send her home with this child if he's alive. But at least she'll be healthier and better able to look after the other children. Marion tells Harris that at the moment they have funds to operate for just 3 days. What will you do? Harris says. Pray, Mr. Harris. I pray. Then I take what I need out of the building fund or whatever fund has money. The Lord knows my predicament, or so I tell myself. He must approve the transfer. What we are fighting isn't godlessness. This is the most godly country on earth. We aren't even fighting disease. It's poverty. Money for food, medicines, that helps. But when we cannot cure or save a life, our patients can at least feel cared for. It should be a basic human right. I confess, Mr. Harris, that as I get older, my prayers aren't about forgiveness. My prayers are for money to do his work. And do you know, dear man, that in my darkest moments, you have so often been my answer to prayer? Matron felt that she had said enough. It was a gamble. She had nothing to put on the table but the truth. And when the truth gets told, worlds change. The Syrophoenician woman's world changed. Same for Jesus. The rest of his ministry cannot be the same because of her. We think we want our world to change, but do we really? Telling the truth takes risk, takes courage. So we don't speak the truth. We don't tell the stories. We stay silent, wait for the right moment, which never comes. And that, right then, is when the truth has to be heard. For the sake of empowering others. The distraught woman in Tyre tells the truth so that others can then say, so that we can then say, you've just told my story, thank you. The truth has to be told. The stories have to be heard so that you know and I know and others know that we are not alone. When voices are sidelined, when involvement is called into question because the person is an outsider, like from Tyre, it is never, ever just about us. It's also about God. Because when our imagination for God's hope for the church and the world is undermined by our lack of imagination for God's hope and God's vision, then God becomes less than God. The Syrophoenician woman tells the truth about God, and in doing so helps us to imagine truth anew for ourselves and for others. And therein lies hope I can hold on to. May it be so.